You have to have honest, real, raw, true conversation and prayer with God.
You go down into the water, and when you do, the old person dies. You come up out of the water as a new creation in Jesus Christ.
Hey, welcome to Church Experience. Thank you so much for spending part of your weekend with us. Now is a great time to grab your weeklies and head to your seats if you haven't already, because the service starts in 90 seconds.
I'm here to tell you today that God wants to set you free. Oh yeah, He wants to set you free.
Pursue a relationship with Him. Grow in your walk with Him. Get closer to Him. Spend more time with Him because He's better. If you want your life to get better, then get around the one who is better. Get around Jesus. Get around the one who has power to change and transform your life. Get around the one who has the perfect grace for you and the perfect love for you and the perfect joy for your soul. Listen, He is better.
Hey Hey, Church Experience. I am so glad that you are joining us today. We have such an impactful service that we are going to be joining you, and we're going to dive into some great worship. But before we do, I would love to tell you, if you have any prayer requests or comments, you want to get a hold of us, why don't you go ahead and scan that QR code, or you can go to www.churchexperience.tv/connect. And we would love to spend time with you, get to know you, get back to you. Another way, if you want to make sure you always know what's going on, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right there. You don't want to miss it, and you'll know what's going on at all times. But you know what? I am ready to dive into today's worship, so let's do it.
Spirit, break out, break our walls down. Spirit, break out, heaven come down. Erupt with praise. Can you hear it? The sound of heaven touching earth. The sound of heaven touching earth. Our Father, all of heaven rolls your name. Sing louder. Let this place erupt with praise. Can you hear it? The sound of heaven touching earth. The sound of heaven touching earth. Spirit, break out. Break our walls down. Spirit, break out. Heaven come down. King Jesus, your name we lift it high. Your glory shaking up the earth and skies. Revival, we want to see your kingdom here. We want to see your kingdom here. King Jesus, man, we're lifting high. Your glory shaking up the earth and sky. Revival, we want to see your kingdom here. We want to see your kingdom here. Spirit, break out. Break our Spirit break out, heaven come down.
Alone in my sorrow and dead in my sin, lost without hope, with no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. When death was arrested and my life began, ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. My orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace, so free, washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Savior displayed on a criminal's cross. Darkness rejoiced, though his heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began. In the darkness, we were waiting without hope, without light. Till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the Church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of all shall not kneel, shall not fade. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus.
We praise you, Father. We praise you for your glory. We praise you for sending your Son. We praise you, Father, when times get hard. We praise you in the storms. We praise you because you gave us eternal life. You gave us grace. You gave us mercy. And we are eternally thankful for you. Father, we come before you in the name of Jesus to just praise you in the storms. We love you. Amen.
This morning we're continuing our series on miracles. We have talked about the grand and huge miracles that God is able to do. The kind of things that when they happen, people just have to stand back and go, whoa. Something supernatural had to happen here because there's no way that could happen without the hand of God involved. And maybe you have experienced some of those kind of miracles in your life, maybe you haven't. But last week we talked about some other kind of miracles, some miracles that happen in your life that maybe other people will overlook or pass off as coincidence. But when you are in tune with God's Spirit, you realize that it's God's working in your life that particular day. And you realize that even these small things are miracles that God does in your life. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about a different kind of miracle and what we do on our part of the miracle in order to see these things happen in our lives. Now, you've probably heard the story of David. David was a guy that had a giant problem. Or you might say he had a problem that was a giant. And David is this little guy. He's got to fight this 8-foot tall guy, and there's no way in his power he'd ever be able to defeat a giant like that. But what do we say? When we have a miracle, we look to the one who has the strength to overcome it, right? So by picking up a small stone and by charging into battle against this giant so much larger than him, God was able to direct that stone to the center of the forehead of that giant. The giant fell, and David was able to overpower him at that point and claim victory. David had a giant problem, and God provided a miracle to overcome that problem. Now, David is not the only person that has giant problems, is he? In fact, the Bible is full of people that have large problems that they need answers to. And today we're going to take a look at a story of another person that had a problem. And this story is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. And the story is about the king of Judah, a guy by the name of King Jehoshaphat. Now, King Jehoshaphat and the people, they're faced with this giant problem. And if you remember what we have learned so far in this series is that every miracle starts with what? A problem, right? Do you have any problems? Well, then you're a candidate for a miracle if you've got some problems. But here, King Jehoshaphat and the people, they're faced with this giant problem, which leads to this giant question in their life. And the question is this: are we going to shrink away in fear and unbelief at what our human eyes see and our human ears hear? Or will we trust the only one that can help us as we face these giant problems together? 2 Chronicles chapter 20 gives us a snapshot of the day that King Jehoshaphat is going through. It begins like any other day, but quickly turns into something that's much like chaos. So in verse 1 and 2, it says, after this, the Moabites and the Ammonites with some of the Meunites, they come to make war on Jehoshaphat. And what's the big deal? Well, each one of those armies is larger than King Jehoshaphat's army. Each one of those armies could easily defeat the people of Israel. But now all three of them are coming at the same time. That provides a huge problem to King Jehoshaphat. So these people are coming, and it says some men come and they tell Jehoshaphat, this vast army is coming against you from Edom and from the other side of the sea. In fact, it's already in Hazan Tamar. Well, it starts with after this. After what? After breakfast. After he wakes up and has coffee on the porch, reading the Jerusalem Gazette. After what? No. It's talking about after chapter 19. You see, in chapter 19, Jehoshaphat tells the people that no longer will you ever worship other idols. No longer are you going to worship any other god. The only God that we are going to worship in Judah is the God of Israel. So they put away all their idols. They put away all their other worship. They started only worshiping God. And because of that, there was peace in their land. And they're on this high because they're all on the same page worshiping the true God of Israel. Well, if you know anything about the way the devil works, he doesn't bother you if things are going bad, does he? I don't need to mess with them. They're already on the wrong path. The man, you get on the right path and you start doing things wrong, that's when he wants to mess with you, isn't it? Because he wants to get you off of that path and get you away from following God. So here's all these people of Judah, these people of Israel, they're finally on the right path. They're doing things the right way. They're on this high, and that's when the devil steps in. And it's at this particular time that these three armies decide we're going to invade them at this time. So with the announcement that he gets on this invasion, he comes down from this high in a hurry. Hazan Tamar was a town that's only 15 minutes away, or 15 miles away from Jerusalem. It was less than a day's march for these armies to come and to take on the people of Israel. It was a giant problem, a problem that required a giant miracle. So this morning I'd like to talk with you about what I believe to be one of the greatest formulas we can have on how we can deal with the giant problems in our lives. How we can handle the trials and the impossible things that we handle in our lives. You see, when you and I are faced with the giants in our lives, the giants like sickness or wayward children or troubled marriages or financial losses or the death of loved ones, that list goes on and on, whatever the problem you're facing is. We can respond in one of two ways. We can respond in the human way, say, what can I do to overcome this problem? And we start running around trying to say, maybe I'll do this or I'll do that. And you realize you're just chasing your tail. If you could handle the problem, it wouldn't be a problem. Or we can do what Jehoshaphat and the people of Israel did, and we can turn to God and turn the problem over to him. Watch what Jehoshaphat and the people of God do in response to this great problem that they are facing. They did 7 things to overcome this problem. And hopefully, if you can take these 7 things and apply them in your life, you'll be able to overcome the problems that you're facing, and you'll receive the miracle of God seeing you through that problem. Here's the first thing they did. They turned to God in prayer, and they shared that need with the other believers. See, that's what the king does here in the opening verses in chapter 20 and verse 3. It says, alarmed, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord, and he proclaimed a fast for all the people of Judah. He was alarmed. He was literally woken up and aroused. What do I do? Oh no, I'm afraid. So instead of trying to figure out what he can do on his own, he calls upon the Lord in prayer. And he calls all the people to join him. He had a lot of options on what he could have done. He could have said, well, what do I do? I'm the king. Well, maybe if we put a force over here and have some people lying in wait over there and maybe, get the battalion of bow and arrow guys over here, maybe we'll be able to win that. But he couldn't do that. The army was too big. He could have just given in to his laziness. And you know what? This problem's not really that bad. Maybe they're just practicing war games around our city. That sounds familiar. And maybe that's what's happening. Or he could have just, trusted and rested in his past victories. Hey, we always win. I'm not worried about what's going to happen. Those would have been the natural human responses to a big problem. But instead, King Jehoshaphat does what's not natural. He calls on the Lord. to deal with the fear. We call on God to deal with the worry and the uncertainty and the hopelessness that the people of Israel are facing. So let me ask you this question. Where do you camp when the giants are surrounding your land? Where do you turn when you're facing insurmountable odds that you know you have no power to overcome on your own? I believe we have to first turn to the Lord. We have to include his people in this giant problem. You know, here, King Jehoshaphat, he stands up and he calls the people to prayer. Not just him, but he calls all the people together to prayer. He calls all the people together to fast. You know, I can't tell you how many times somebody has come up to me and said, hey, I was in the hospital last week and almost died, but I'm okay now. I'm like, what do you tell me? You know, I would have come and I prayed for you. I'd have come and visited you in the hospital. If you don't tell me, I can't possibly know. I mean, I'm the pastor. You should tell me. But then I realized I do the same thing myself. You know, I've got problems, and well, I'm the pastor. I should pray for this. I don't need to bother everybody up with this. They've got their own problems. You realize there's power in numbers. When everybody comes together in prayer, and King Jehoshaphat knew that. He's the king. You know, my prayers are important. I'm the king. No, he calls everybody together. And they all come together in prayer. Here's the second thing they did to overcome this giant problem. They remember how powerful and how mighty God is and how faithful he'd been to them in the past. I want you to notice the progression of this prayer. In verse 5, it says, Jehoshaphat stood up in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem at the temple of the Lord in front of the new courtyard. He says this in verse 6. Lord, the God of our ancestors, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. You see, here he's recognizing who God is. Is he doing that because God forgot who he was? No, he's doing that because he needs to remember who God is. He's facing this giant problem in his life, and he knows he doesn't have the power or the strength to overcome that problem. But if he remembers just how mighty God is and just who God is, then he can put his faith in God that can overcome any problem that comes along. He tells them, you're the God of our ancestors. You're the God of my great-grandfather. You're the God of my grandfather. You're the God of my father. You're the God of my family. He says, you're the God that's up in heaven, that's overlooking everything and has his hand involved in our lives. You're ruling over all the kingdoms of the nations. You've got power. You've got might in your hands. No one can withstand you or come against you. That's who you are, God. I need to remember that because I've got this big problem I need you to help me with. The second thing he did was recognize what God had already done for them in the past. In verse 7, it says, our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend? They have lived in it and have built in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, if calamity comes upon us, whether the sword of judgment or plague or famine, we will stand in your presence before the temple that bears your name, and we will cry out to you in our distress, and you will hear us, and you will save us. Jehoshaphat remembers how great God is, how mighty and powerful he is, but then he remembers everything that God has done for them in the past. He calls to mind that in the midst of this great challenge they're going through. He knows that God is the God of the past. God is the God of the present right now. And because of that, he can trust God in the future. He says, God, you hear us, you save us, you will provide for us your miracle. But the third thing that we have to do to overcome the giant problems in our lives, and this might be one that you have most trouble with, and that's when you admit you don't know what to do, but your eyes remain on him. Jehoshaphat continues in verse 10 through 11. But now here are men from Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whose territory you wouldn't allow Israel to invade when they came from Egypt. So we turned away from them and we didn't destroy them. See how they're repaying us by coming to drive us out of the possession that you gave us as an inheritance? Our God, will you not judge them? For we don't have the power to face this vast army that's attacking us. We don't know what to do. But our eyes are on you. Did you know that it's okay to be clueless? It's okay to be confused about what to do when you face the giant problems in your life that you really need a miracle. The king says, hey, we've got the power to face this vast army that's coming. They're 3 times bigger than we are. But he knew that he wasn't trusting in anything human or earthly or fleshly. He was going to keep his eyes on the Lord. Remember the story of Jesus walking on the water in the New Testament? The storm is raging and the waves are just driving. The disciples are in this boat back and forth and they're scared to death. And as they're worried about dying, they look up and there's Jesus taking a stroll across the top of the water. And, there's one in every crowd. Peter's like, oh, let me do it. Let me try. And he gets out of the boat and he sees Jesus doing it. So he's looking at Jesus and he's walking on top of the water. This is great. But all of a sudden, maybe a wave slaps him in the face or something and takes his attention off of Jesus. And when his eyes come off of Jesus, what happens? He starts to sink, doesn't he? And he's about to drown in this terrible storm that's going on. He looks back up at Jesus and puts his eyes on him, says, save me. And Jesus just reaches down and brings him into the boat. And the storm comes to a calm. See, what we learn from this is as long as we keep our eyes on Jesus, he's going to save us from the problems that we find ourselves in. The moment we take our eyes off of him, that's when we get into trouble. And that's what King Jehoshaphat knew here. He said, hey, I don't know what to do. I'm the king. I've got everything at my disposal here, and I don't know what to do, but I'm going to keep my eyes on you. So that's the third thing that we have to do as we face the giant problems in our lives, is we might admit we don't know what to do, but Lord, we're going to keep our eyes on you. Here's the fourth thing that we do, and that is we listen to God's direction. We listen to God's direction. Now, if you go to a doctor and you know what your problem is and you know what you want the doctor to do, maybe you want him to prescribe a certain drug or do a certain procedure for you, and you get to the doctor says, well, here's what we're going to do, and it's something different than what you wanted. You listen to him with your ears and you heard what he said, but are you really listening to him because you want something else to happen? Well, the same works with us when God is giving us direction. We might all hear what God has to say, but if God's not saying what we want him to say, we're not really hearing what he has to say, are we? We think, well, this is what I want in life. This is what I think is best for me. And I know what's better for my life than what God knows. So even though we know God's word says this, I believe this is going to be best for me. So we don't listen to his direction. We follow our own direction. Which direction do you think is best? The scripture goes on in verse 13 and says, all the men of Judah with their wives, their children, their little ones, they're standing there before the Lord. And the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jehaziel, the son of Zechariah. Then it goes on to list that he was the son of Benaiah, and he was the son of Jael, and he was the son of Mattaniah, a Levite, descendant of Asaph. And just basically, there's a long descendants of people here that were God's people. And God chose Jehaziel to send this message to the people. See, in the midst of our giant problem, I ask yourself, well, how does God give me direction? Well, he gives you direction in a couple of ways. One way he gives you direction is in his word. There's not a problem you're facing in your life that you can't find an answer to in God's word. It's there. And if your spirit, your mind is open to what God is leading you to and directing you to, you'll find the answer there. You may not want that answer because of it. You say, well, it's not in there. I'm not finding what I want. Here's the other way he gives you direction. It's through people. Men and women of God who've been there before, who've maybe gone through the trials and the tribulations before. Maybe they've studied God's word longer and have answers for you. So God speaks to you through other people. In this particular case, he speaks to all the people of Judah through one guy, through Jahaziel. He's this chosen vessel here in the story to give the direction to the people. But think, who is it in your life that is giving you direction? Well, sure, it's the Lord and His Word, but you have people in your life. Wise people that give you advice in the situation you're going through. When people give you advice, take that advice, weigh it against God's Word, see if it matches up. If it doesn't match with God's Word, realize that although those people may mean well, that's not advice you need to take. Here's the fifth thing we do when we face giant problems in our lives, and that's realize that the battle that we're facing, the burden we are facing, is not ours. That battle or that burden is the Lord's. In fact, it says in verse 15, this is what the Lord says to you. This is the Spirit speaking through Jahaziel to the people. It says, don't be afraid. Yeah, there's three armies coming against you. They're way bigger than you are. But don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged because of this vast army. Because the battle's not yours. It's God's. Tomorrow, let's go down there and march against them. They'll be climbing up by the pass of Ziz, and you'll find them there at the end of the gorge in the desert of Jeruel. You're not going to have to fight this battle. Take up your position, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. Yeah, you don't have to take your swords, don't take your knives or your slingshots, take a lawn chair. Take some bottled water with you, some popcorn. It's going to be a great show. It's not your battle. You're just going to watch. This is God's battle. Now, as they realize that, God is telling you, as you're facing the problems in your life, stop trying to fight this battle on your own. Take your strength and your position in me. Stand firm and see what I'm going to do for you. Don't give in to the fear that you're facing as you face this problem. Don't continue in your depression. Go out and face this giant in my strength. And remember that I am with you. The Bible says when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Lord will lift up a standard. And that standard is a reminder that God is with us and He's for us and He'll deliver us. That brings us to the sixth thing we do. We want to overcome the giant problems in our lives, and that's praise the Lord for victory before it happens. Say we won before we've ever played a game. Poor Nolan's on a Little League baseball team, and they're not very good. They lose every game. And we went to play a team at Countryside a couple of weeks ago, and it just so happened that particular night, they had orientation for the middle schools in the area. So the other team only had 7 players, which meant they had to forfeit, and Nola's team won. So they decide that they're going to send a couple of players from Nola's team to the other team so they can just play the game anyway. But even before the game started, Nola's team was jumping around and cheering, we won, we won, we won the game. They hadn't played the game yet. And as silly as that sounds, that's exactly what we're learning in this particular message, is that you may have problems or battles that God has not solved with His miracle yet, but we can jump around and say we won because we know who's fighting that battle. In verse 18, Jehoshaphat bows down with his face to the ground, and all the people of Judah and Jerusalem fell down and worshiped to the Lord. And some of the Levites from the Kohathites and the Korahites stood up and they praised the Lord, the God of Israel, with this very loud voice. Had they at this point already won the victory? No, they hadn't won yet. But it didn't stop them from claiming victory. They had victory proclaimed before the battle even happened. So here's the truth. As God's people, we already have victory over our enemies, don't we? We already have victory over the giant problems of our lives. Do you know that? Well, here's how I know that. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, it says, now thanks be to God who always leads us in triumph or victory in Christ. In 1 John 5:4, it declares, "For whoever is born of God overcomes the world." And this is the victory that overcomes the world. It's our faith. So praise and thankfulness for your situation and the answer to your situation doesn't start when you see the victory won. It starts before you see it, as you recognize that the answer is already on the way. That brings us to the last thing we do as we're facing these giant problems in our lives. And that's to keep an eye on our faith level. Well, the answer is on the way. You know, one of the challenges of our Christian life is when we're facing these giant problems in our lives, our faith level tends to go up and go down with the different things that we're facing. And because of that, we find ourselves doubting what God will do more than believing what he's promised he will do. In verse 20, it says, "Early in the morning, they left for the desert of Tekoa. And as they set out, Jehoshaphat stands up and says, 'Listen to me, Judah and the people of Jerusalem. Have faith in the Lord your God, and you will be upheld. Have faith in his prophets, and you will be successful.'" His faith level was high. He said, listen, you are going to win. You are going to be successful. So what is your faith level this morning as you're facing the giant problems you face in your life? Here's what George Mueller said. He says, "Faith does not operate in the realm of the possible. There's no glory for God in that which is humanly possible. Faith begins where man's power ends." You see, faith is not merely holding on to God, it's believing that God is holding on to you. When you're facing these terrible problems in your lives, problems that are so big, you know you don't have the strength to overcome yourself, and you feel like you're holding on to God, and I can't hold on any longer, it's too much. You're forgetting the fact that you're not the one holding on to God, that he's holding on to you. And he's got the strength to see you through whatever problem you're facing. So are you tempted to let go of God's hand this morning because you can't see how God is going to intervene in your giant problems? Listen, when you can't see his hand in the matter, trust his heart. He will never fail you. You know, we understand here that in this particular passage, these people are facing this terrible problem, a problem that they thought would lead to death and destruction. Never did they stop praising and worshiping God. Praise and worship, it's a strange and hard thing to do in the midst of our problems, isn't it? Especially if we don't see God working at that particular time. How many times have you had a problem in your life that just weighed so heavy on your shoulders that you drug yourself to church, but you just didn't feel like worshiping and praising? You know, you just, I just can't sing today. I can't find joy today. When you come in here and you force yourself to do it, and what you find is when you're praising and worshiping in the midst of these problems, the stress just lifts off your shoulders. And you find joy where you didn't think you would ever be able to find joy. That's what praise and worship will do for you. And that's what they were doing here. If you look at verse 21, it says, "After consulting the people, Jehoshaphat appoints men to sing to the Lord and to praise him for the splendor of his holiness as they went out at the head of the army, saying, 'Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever.'" Do you think that scared the other army? You know, instead of putting the tanks in front of the army going towards them, instead of putting all the guys with the bows and arrows and everything, they put the choir out in front. The only way that would scare anybody is that they put people like me in the choir, and that would scare everybody. But it says, as they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushes against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir who were invading Judah. And they were defeated. The people of Israel didn't have to lift a finger. Here they've got 3 armies coming to overcome, to take over their land, to take them as slaves, to take all of their possessions. And somehow, as the army is singing, those 3 armies are defeated. How'd that happen? Well, the Ammonites and the Moabites rose up against the men of Mount Seir to destroy and annihilate them. Hey, They're trying to get the land that we want. They're trying to take the things that we want to take. So the Ammonites and the Moabites, they killed all the people from Mount Seir. And they said, oh, that was nice. Now it's ours. They looked at each other and said, oh, there's another group that wants it. And they started fighting each other. And they killed themselves. It says they finished slaughtering the men from Seir, and then they helped destroy one another. And when the men of Judah come to the place that overlooks the desert, and they're looking for this vast army that's supposed to come and kill them and defeat them, the only thing they saw were dead bodies lying on the ground. No one had escaped. They had a huge problem. 3 armies were coming to destroy them, but there was a huge miracle. They all destroyed themselves. So I want to ask you this morning, are you facing a seemingly impossible problem in your life this morning that the only way you can find a way out would be if God provided a miracle in your life? So you need to begin to praise and worship God, because God inhabits the praise of his people. God does not come to rescue the people who are hungry for his blessing. He doesn't come to provide miracles for those that are not willing to give him the glory for the victory. But you see, music is a very powerful weapon in the arsenal of God. The Bible tells us make a joyful noise to the Lord. That means that all of us can praise the Lord in song, and then if we're going to face these giants of our lives head on, we can do it singing songs of praise and joy, because we know the God who fights the battle for us. Okay, so they did these things that we described today as they faced this problem, and God provided a miracle. So what were the results of letting go of this battle and just turning it over to God? What were the results of praying as a large group for God to provide a miracle for them? Well, here's the first result. Untold and immeasurable blessing came their way. See, the intention of these 3 armies was to come take all their stuff. We're going to go and take everything that belongs to the people of Israel, and we're going to take it back to our homes, and we're going to keep their stuff. Just like little kids, right? Saw a t-shirt this week that had rules for toddlers. Number 1, everything is mine. Number 2, if you have it, it's still mine, and down the list. Everybody wants what the other person had. So that was the intention of these 3 armies. They wanted to take all of the people of Israel's stuff, but what was the result? In verse 25, Jehoshaphat and his men went and they carried off all of their plunder. And they found among them a great amount of equipment and clothing and articles of value, more than they could take away. There was so much plunder, it took 3 days to collect it all. So here are those armies that come to steal their stuff, but at the end, through God's miracles, the people of Israel got all the army stuff. Listen, you can't outgive God when you do things his way. One of the results is that God is going to bless your life. Here's the second thing that happened. You'll learn to praise and worship in a deeper way when you finally follow these directions when you have giant problems in your life. In verse 27, it says, then led by Jehoshaphat, all of the men of Judah and Jerusalem returned joyfully to Jerusalem. For the Lord had given them cause to rejoice over their enemies. They entered Jerusalem, this long day out there with these battles and everything going on. They come home, what do? Do they go to McDonald's? Do they go to Walmart and get supplies? No, where do they go? They go to the temple with their harps and lyres and trumpets, and they worship. You see, praise and worship not only happens during the crisis, but it's now part of their lives, even after the victory. You see, praise and worship is not something that we do. Praise and worship is something that we live. It's not just an event or a service. Praise and worship is a lifestyle. And here's the third result of what happened that day, and that is you learn the reason behind the miracle. If you remember when we started this series, I told you that God never does a miracle just for the sake of that miracle. He doesn't heal a blind person just so that blind person can see. He heals the blind person so that everybody that knows the blind person gives glory to the God that healed the blind person, right? There's always a reason for the miracle that God did. Well, what was the reason for the miracle of defeating these three armies? Well, it tells us in verse 29 through 30 that when all was said and done, the fear of God came on all the surrounding kingdoms when they learned how the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. And the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was at peace, for his God had given him rest on every side. You see, if you were another nation and you thought, you know what? I like that land that Israel has. You know what? They got a lot of good stuff. Let's go invade them and take their stuff. No, they just saw what God did when three other armies tried that. So the result of that miracle wasn't just to save the people of Israel, but it's so that all the surrounding nations would know that there's a real God that watches over his people and provides miracles for those who trust in him. Are you facing problems in your life today that are so big that only a miracle will help you overcome them? Then do what Jehoshaphat did. Do what the people of Israel did when they faced this giant problem and just turn the problem over to God. He will fight the battle for you. And when he does, remember there's always a reason behind the miracle. So worship God, give him the glory, and his miracles will continue daily in your life. Would you pray with me, please? Dear Heavenly Father, we all have huge problems. Most of the problems we bring on ourselves, but other problems we really have nothing to do with. But they're all so big, Father, that there's nothing we can do in our power to take care of them. So we thank you for the fact that you love us so much, that you promised that those problems are not our battle. That when we put our trust in a God that is so huge, that has done everything for us in the past, and believe that he will do things for us in the future, we trust that those miracles will happen, and that through those miracles, you will receive all the glory and the honor and the praise. Father, thank you for your miracles. We pray in Jesus' name.
Before our usher team comes by to collect our response cards and receive our tithes and offerings, here's a few important things happening with our CE family. Our church experience Butler campus had an exciting grand opening with many first-time guests and 92 in attendance. Please continue to pray for the CE Butler team and for those in the area to come to experience a full life in Jesus Christ. We can't wait to celebrate the life and resurrection of Jesus with our church family on Sunday, April 17th. Easter Sunday services are some of the most important and impacting services we have all year, and Easter is now right around the corner. It's also one of the best times to invite someone you know who doesn't yet consider themselves a follower of Jesus. Make plans now to join us with your family and friends on Easter Sunday. As the ushers come forward to collect our response cards and receive our tithes and offerings, our next fund offering is an opportunity for us to collectively make a bigger kingdom investment that stretches into future generations. As you generously give to the next fund, it will allow us to help people in need in our communities, invest in the next generation at all CE campuses, support brand new churches, launch new CE locations, and save for future building projects at each CE campus. We are prayerfully asking you to give above and beyond to generously fuel the vision God is leading us toward next. With your partnership, we can turn this vision into a God-pleasing and life-changing reality. To each person who has given above and beyond to the next fund, thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your commitment, prayers, investment of time, and financial generosity that truly helps more people experience a full life in Jesus Christ.
Heaven thundered and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded and the mountains moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on.
third day dawned. Darkness was denied when the stone was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Hey. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Oh, you're unstoppable, God.
What a great service it has been. I love the worship, the message, spending time together as a CE family. You know, you may say, I want to get more connected. And better yet, you may have just made a commitment during the service in your faith. And we would love to hear about it. Please reach out by going ahead and pulling out your phone, scan that QR code. Or if you want to know a little more about us, feel free to go ahead and check out our social media, our website, our app. We have all those available for you and would love to get more connected with you. Another great way to get connected is to subscribe right down here. We have that just for you. And the other thing we have for you is another great service next week. See you then.